So I'm going to try to convince you today that the movie The Big Lebowski is actually a loose reference to a Russian novel from the 19th century called The Idiot by an author called Fyodor Dostoevsky. Okay, so what I'll do first is kind of describe the novel, which is much less well known than The Big Lebowski. The book, much like the movie, which we'll talk about, the plot is very convoluted. In fact, you could argue there is no plot. It's more centered around characters and how they interact with each other. There's a reason for that, which we'll talk about. But basically it starts with this Prince Myshkin, who is an aristocrat, a Russian aristocrat. He's on a train on the way back from Switzerland. He has epilepsy. He was there trying to receive treatment for that. He's on his way back to Russia. He meets another Russian aristocrat named Rogozin. And they're talking. They like each other initially. And Rogozin is telling Myshkin that he is in love with this woman, and he himself has just come into a lot of money as an inheritance, a huge amount of money, and he is going to try to marry this woman. Well, the plot develops from there. Myshkin ends up falling into some weird sort of love, or a kind of ambiguous love, with this woman. Her name is Nastya Filipovna. Here you get to hear East Texas trying to pronounce Russian names, by the way. But he falls in love with her in a weird way. It's sort of a compassion. He feels sorry for her in some ways. She is unclear on what she's going to do, and she has trouble being sincere. Really, she's been hurt. She was brought up by someone who abused her sexually, was grooming her, and now he's trying to basically marry her off to get the trouble over with, get her settled and get that taken care of. And then the rest of the novel is a series of interactions where they are interacting with various, aristocratic dinners. They're at a vacation home out at some resort town at some point. And it has been described for this reason by many critics as the most chaotic of Dostoevsky's novels, plot-wise. It really it doesn't have a plot. Which brings us to our first point of similarity. I'm going to move to the more simple to the more complex and subtle points of similarity between these two works and try to convince you that The Big Lebowski is a reference to this book. This is the kind of plot that The Big Lebowski has. It is... you have to watch it several times before you can piece together all of what's actually happening. Who has the money? The money was never actually delivered, but it was never supposed to be delivered because they actually didn't have a hostage. She was just gone. And also, you're trying to figure out various parts of different characters. The Big Lebowski himself, which is not the dude, obviously, but the Big Lebowski, Jeffrey Lebowski, is not being honest about who he is or whether he actually has any money, and that's going to be a theme. But the plot is hard to piece together, and that's for a reason. The point of The Big Lebowski, if there is a point, one of the points, let's say, is arguably to show how this character, a man for his time, he's just the man for his time, the dude, how he interacts with the society around him. Which is exactly what Dostoevsky said about The Idiot. He took Myshkin and he put his highest ideals in Myshkin. This is a little bit of a dissimilarity with The Big Lebowski, but puts his highest ideal into Myshkin, which is Christian love, and he wants to see how it will interact with Russian society of his time. And then he did this with lots of his novels, where he's writing the novel trying to settle something for himself, trying to figure out for himself whether this ideal works. And so he's writing kind of not knowing what's going to happen at all points. So it has that chaotic plot structure, just like The Big Lebowski. Both of them are also organized around, everything is organized around one man's experience, one man's character and what he does. In fact, in The Big Lebowski, in the film noir tradition, he's in every scene of the movie. It's all about following, what's going on with the dude, and he figures into every part of the story. Similarly with the book The Idiot, it's not film noir, obviously, and not being a film, but it's all centered around this character, Prince Myshkin. Now, interestingly, let's talk about the characters now and the similarities with characters. Let's talk about that central character. The dude is the man for his time. That's what the narrator says, the stranger says when opening the movie. And you get the sense in watching the movie that the point of the movie is that the dude is unique in some way. And he is, in some ways, a simple character. And I'll expand on this in just a little bit, but he's in some way guileless. He isn't trying to deceive anyone. The dude is not trying to put on airs. He walks around in a bathrobe. He likes to bowl. He's not lying to you about who he is or what he likes or what he's trying to be. So much so that many people around him, as he interacts with different characters in the movie, think he's an idiot or think he's somehow manipulable. Let's say that. Think about his interaction with Philip Seymour Hoffman's character.
You never went to college.
Who, assumes that the dude didn't go to college, right? The dude did go to college. Think about why the Big Lebowski, that is Jeffrey Lebowski, picks the dude to be the sort of simpleton that won't figure it out and no one will care about this person. That's why he picks him to be the runner to the nihilist gang. So he's simple and guileless. He's actually not as stupid as people think he is, but because of that lack of deception and that lack of putting on of airs, people think he can be manipulated. People think he's stupid. People think he's beneath them, which is exactly the idea of the idiot. The main character, that's literally called the idiot for this reason. Mishkin, he's so simple and guileless and so straightforward and has no dissembling in him that people can't figure out. Everyone he meets, they can't figure out whether he is some amazing person of true moral excellence or whether he's just an idiot or maybe even like something's wrong with his head. So that character is there's a strong connection there, a strong similarity in that way. And to the extent that there are differences, it's because the dude is for his times. He's the man for his times, right? It's not necessarily that he's going to be the highest Christian ideal and therefore guileless, but guileless for other reasons, because he lives in the 90s in LA and he's kind of a ex-hippie stoner. Okay, so that's the first character. This one's a little bit of a stretch, but in both works, there is a beautiful woman in some way being paid to marry or be married to a man. In the case of the Big Lebowski, that's Bunny. She's a trophy wife married to the Big Lebowski himself. She's a beautiful woman. She's paid in some broad sense to be there, to be his wife, and obviously doesn't care about him. The plot line, to the extent that there is one, of the Big Lebowski is also one in which Nastasia is being more literally paid by Rogozin to marry him. That's one of the plot lines. He pays her 100,000 rubles to marry him. She takes it and she throws it into the fire because she has this destructive personality, sort of like Bunny Lebowski. She ends up destroying the car. She crashes it. She has this destructive sort of mentality, but again, for a different reason, probably. And finally, the third character is actually a group of characters, a group of nihilists. And this one might be the strongest connection, which really is the one that tipped me off that there might be a connection between these two works. In The Big Lebowski, there's obviously the group of the three nihilists, the German-ish nihilists.
We want some money, Lebowski.
One of whom is Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And they make a point of saying all the time, we are nihilists. We believe in nothing, Lebowski. And that must be exhausting. But in The Idiot, there is also a literal group of nihilists. This is actually a theme that runs through lots of Dostoevsky's work. This is something he was really deeply concerned about. Nihilists of a certain brand were kind of coming into Russia at that time from Western Europe. They were a particular kind of nihilists, probably not the exact same brand that we get in The Big Lebowski. They were socialists, Marxists maybe, but also nihilists in the sense that they didn't believe in God. They were trying to destroy traditional social structures like the Russian aristocracy, Dostoevsky was aware ahead of time that there were these elements coming into Russia, which did eventually play a part in the destruction of the Russian aristocracy and the liberation of the serfs. Okay, but in both cases, there's this group of nihilists who go around telling people that they're nihilists and that they believe in nothing, Lebowski. All right. Now, let's talk about, those nihilists are going to come back, but let's talk about one really important motif in both works. In both works, one of the strongest motifs throughout the movies, or one of the strongest themes throughout the work, is that it is centered around a genuine, guileless person interacting with a superficial, dissembling, deceptive society. So think about the Big Lebowski. Let's walk through some of the characters that the dude interacts with. So the dude obviously is the innocent, the guileless person. But every person that he interacts with has some sort of major deception at the heart of their character, which is not apparent on the surface. So think about the Big Lebowski himself. It comes out that he actually, so he presents as this wealthy man, not only wealthy, but someone who worked hard for everything that he had. He talks about these men who could not achieve on their own, right? And he lost his legs to a Chinaman in Korea. He worked hard for everything he has, and he has a lot. Well, it turns out later in the movie, he's actually not rich at all. He doesn't actually have the money. It was all the mom or his wife's money, who is deceased, his late wife's money, and he a lot of it is in a trust that is not really his, and he doesn't have access to it, which is why he fakes the kidnapping of his new wife so that he can keep some of the money that comes out of this foundation. Again, like really convoluted plot, but it turns out he's not wealthy and he didn't work for the money. Let's think about the Bunny. Bunny, it turns out, is like this sort of hot trophy wife type, L.A., lay by the pool, blonde hair, blue-eyed type. Well, it turns out later in the movie that she's a runaway. She had run away from a farm in, oh God, now I'm forgetting, some Midwestern state, just in the middle of nowhere. And her family had paid a sort of private eye to come track her down, and he shows the dude a picture, and he's like, this is the family farm. This is her. She's this, simple farm girl. Let's think about the nihilists. It turns out the nihilists are not really nihilists. For one thing, at the end of the movie, well, this will come back, they want what's theirs. They want what's fair. They are owed that money. And of course, nihilism is the claim that there's really no such thing as desert or justice or anyone owing anything else. Nihilism is the claim that there is no morality. It doesn't exist. It's made up. Let's think about Maud. Maud is like a feminist artist. Women's empowerment. This one gets a little complicated, but towards the end it comes out that she just wants to have a baby. Now, we could talk about different waves of feminism, but on some forms of feminism, and arguably like the kind that Maud is at least stereotypically associated with, this would be a task for a woman that's beneath her. This is not something that a woman should devote her life to, but it turns out, even though she's a big feminist artist, high society person, really, she just wants this baby, which is why she gets the dude to impregnate her.
I'm just helping her conceive, man.
Now, here's one which is probably not fair game because it didn't make its way into the final cut of the movie. But in the original script, you may have heard that it turns out Walter actually didn't go to Vietnam. It's kind of a funny aspect of the movie, and it's something that a lot of people theorized even before that came out, that was in the original script, because he puts out a little bit of that energy, that person who's kind of overcompensating for the fact that he didn't do something by making everything about that thing. Everything has to do with Vietnam, even though there's no literal connection, of course. But in the original script, Walter is presenting as a Vietnam vet who influences all these aspects of his personality, and it turns out, at least in the original script, maybe not fair game, that he didn't actually even go to Vietnam. Okay, so there's more there. There's more, and that's the whole. You watch the movie. For me, at least, it took me a few times watching the movie to figure out that that's sort of the theme of the whole movie, is that everyone except the dude, with a few exceptions, is pretending to be something they're not. There's deception. There's superficiality. The theme of the movie, the reason the dude is a man for his time and place is because he's not pretending to be something that he's not. Well, this turns out to be the same thing in The Idiot. I won't go into much detail here. If you're not familiar with the book, it's going to kind of fall on deaf ears. But it turns out that Dostoevsky has said that this was the point of running up this Christian ideal against society. The Christian ideal is a simple, straightforward, guileless ideal, and society is superficial and deceptive, always trying to pretend to be something that it's not. And so you have the prince attending these dinners where everyone is kind of putting on airs. It's sort of like the way people describe Washington, D.C. currently. Everyone is always, trying to maneuver and get something out of self-interest or something like that. The prince is not doing that. He's just approaching people and talking to them as people, not trying to pretend to be something that he's not. There's a character, the character who, the guy Totsky who had abused Nastasia, and the character he's trying to marry her off to initially, Ganya, he proposes to her, but you find out later he secretly hates her. In fact, at some point he tries to physically assault her. So he's pretending to be in love with her for this money that he's going to get out of it. Totsky is trying to sell her off, basically. But he actually underneath hates her. He's pretending to do something. It's actually the opposite of what he actually is. There's a character, Lebedev, who's sort of like a social schemer, and he knows all of these intricacies of society. He tries to know as much as he can about everybody, but it's all because he's always involved in these intrigues and these social schemes to, push this person against this person. So it's all like his whole game is deception. Nastasia herself has this duplicity in her, where she can't figure out what she wants. She kind of knows what she wants, but she's always pushing for something else out of this self-destructive streak. She goes with Rogozin, not in the end, not because she loves him, but because she has this self-destructive streak. So again, she's kind of presenting in a way that she isn't actually. And in the end, we get the way it ends. There's this a character I skipped over a little bit named Aglaya. The prince is actually in love with her, but she gets sort of jealous of Nastasia and ends up not. It looks like she and the prince are going to end up together, but she ends up parting ways with them. Her family goes abroad, and she meets and marries this wealthy, exiled Polish count. He's a count, supposedly. But then it turns out the tragedy is, well, he is Polish, but that's the only part of that that's true. He's not wealthy, he's not exiled, and he's not a count. So she gets pulled into this deception, which again is kind of, it's trying to show you, she ended up marrying this guy who's the opposite of Mishkin. Mishkin is not going to deceive you. He is what he claims to be. The Polish count is not what he claims to be. So she chooses the opposite of the ideal that Dostoevsky is presenting us, the simplicity ideal, the innocence ideal, and she goes for the deception of the world. Okay, so in both cases you get instance after instance. In fact, the whole book, the reason, this is me circling back to the first point about the chaotic plot, the reason the plots of both are chaotic is because the plot is not the point. The point of both works is to take this character and have them go into all these different aspects and facets of society and see how a character of innocence and guilelessness and authenticity interacts with the deceptiveness and superficiality and manipulativeness and self-interestedness of a society around them. That's why you get both having this chaotic plot structure, because the plot's not the point. Okay, and finally, here's the real linchpin for me, and here's the second thing that really clued me in that there has to be something going on here, is that there are even events that line up perfectly with each other in both of these works. And one of them is, we'll do the Big Lebowski first. Towards the end, you get this confrontation between the nihilists and the dude, Walter, and Donnie. It's what causes Donnie's death. the nihilists approach the trio and they say, "We want the money, Lebowski." And he and Walter say, "There never was any money. Do you not understand? There's no money. We don't have the money. There never was any money." And the nihilists say, "Well, no, we want the money anyway. We don't care. We'll just, we'll get whatever money you have." But one thing they say, one of the best lines of the movie or interactions of the movie, is they say, "It's not fair that we didn't get the money."
It's not fair! Fair!
And Walter says, "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Who's the effing nihilist?" And what he's pointing out there is that there's a deep inconsistency in that set of attitudes. If you're a nihilist, you think there is no such thing as fairness. You think there is no such thing as morality in general, certainly not justice or moral obligations or fairness. So nothing is unfair if you're a nihilist. So you can't make complaints about fairness. Okay, so that's the Big Lebowski. But in The Idiot, there's this scene where they're all at this dacha, their sort of vacation home, and lots of these characters are interacting with each other, and this group shows up, this group of nihilists. And one of them is making a claim that they deserve an inheritance from Mishkin because his benefactor, who left him a lot of money, actually owed it to this other guy who's in the nihilist group. And I just mentioned several words there that nihilists can't use. What's owed to someone, what's fair, what they deserve. And one of the characters in The Idiot points this out to one of the nihilists, Ippolit. He says, "Wait, did you just say that you deserve this? Aren't you a nihilist?" But that's the same basic interaction. He points out to this nihilist who has just made claims that he deserves something, that it wouldn't be fair if he didn't get it. And the guy says that it's a really brief interaction, just like in The Big Lebowski, but he says that doesn't really make any sense, right? You don't get to make claims to fairness, and the nihilist gets kind of pissy about it. Okay, so that was really the linchpin for me, was that, because those events, it really seems like that interaction in The Big Lebowski is drawn more or less straightforwardly from The Idiot. So again, the Coen brothers who wrote and directed The Big Lebowski have never said this, as far as I know. And feel free to let me know if you've seen anything otherwise. This is really just me spitballing because I see so many similarities between these two works. But let me know what you think. If there's something I'm missing, or if you happen to have read the book and seen that movie, let me know if I missed out on any other similarities. And let me know if you notice, especially in The Big Lebowski, other instances especially where someone is dissembling. They're representing as something that they aren't, in fact. But there you go. The Big Lebowski is just Dostoevsky's The Idiot.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.